Hey guys, a few days ago I posted a video looking back on Home Fire by Kamala Shamsi because I wanted to think about what aspects still stuck out to me a few months after having read it. And in this video I'll be doing the same retrospective type thing for Elmet by Fiona Mozley, also on this year's Women's Prize list and which was shortlisted for the Booker last year. So I'll link my original reviews below. I have a video review and then a long written review if that's your thing. Head to those if you want more details. But in a nutshell, this book is set in present-day rural Yorkshire and deals with land ownership and involves physical and ethical violence with some Robin Hood vibes. So the first thing that sticks out to me is that no matter how fair you are to a book, the context in which you read it can absolutely influence your opinion. And when I think back on last year's Booker long list, which was a strong list, it's a credit to this debut novel that it didn't at all seem out of place alongside so many heavy hitters. But when I directly compared Mosley's writing, as good as it is, to Sebastian Barry and Zadie Smith and George Saunders, it was a step down from those voices for me, and for that reason I was surprised to see it on the shortlist. Now that I've read 10 books from the 2018 Women's Prize, to me, it's clearly one of the best books on this list, and so if I'd read it in this context, I think I would have been more excited about it being such a strong debut, in contrast to some of the other debuts that haven't really come together. Now keep in mind as I go down memory lane that I had the minority opinion on this one. BookTube loves this book, and you can find tons of people eloquently discussing why, but I found it kind of boring. Interesting ideas couched in long stretches of ho-hum prose. I still resent reading a whole paragraph about a patch of tarmac. The pacing is weird too. Things meander for a while and then suddenly it's like, oh, now we're in an action movie. And in that original review I mentioned the beautiful landscape passages, and they are beautiful. But I also think I felt pressure at the time to leave it at that because I thought this was a good book. And I wanted to balance the negative things I was going to bring up with some major positives. Looking back on those passages, they are overwritten, which, you know, overwriting is kind of a trend in contemporary literary fiction, so hardly a unique flaw. There's also something that can happen where if I read a widely reviewed book and notice flaws that haven't been discussed in any of those reviews, they can leap out at me more than they would otherwise. So I had a hard time getting past how unrealistic this first-person narration was. We have a teenage boy who's isolated, clearly intelligent, but only got a rudimentary education, isn't an autodidact or much of a reader, and is surrounded by people who speak very simply, mostly just his father and sister. So essentially, he wouldn't have come into contact with a lot of the vocabulary he uses, but he speaks like a flowering intellectual, and I was so goddamn distracted by it. And I think if another person had brought this up, you know, something like the vocabulary register was a little weird given the circumstances, but I didn't really mind and I still loved the narrator's voice. I don't think it would have bothered me nearly as much, but instead I felt like I was crazy. Like I'd read a different book with a glaring issue that all the other copies somehow didn't have. I don't know, have you ever had that experience? And it disproportionately affected my reading, partly because first-person narration that sounds like third person is kind of a pet peeve of mine, but also it sort of felt like a secret we were all keeping. You can probably see how I still feel about this book. It wasn't for me on a lot of levels. Beyond the handful of flaws, I just didn't enjoy the reading experience very much. I never got fully immersed, but based on what I've read so far of this list, if I were a judge, I wouldn't hesitate to put it on the shortlist because it is an accomplished and interesting book that's experimenting with a mix of elements. The tone is dark without being too brooding. The family dynamics are wonderful. There's gender commentary. The story feels like it's taking place in the present era and in a past era simultaneously. I loved that the landscape was celebrated, but not for being this perfect pastoral setting or the wild moors of northern England type thing. Like this book has its own take on the landscape that meshes the natural world and industrialization without judgment. So without framing the industrial elements as though they're ugly or out of place. I don't have too much more to say about it because honestly I haven't thought about Elmet that much since I finished it, and it'll never be a novel that I'm excited to recommend, but I do feel comfortable recommending it because I think it's a worthwhile read, and so many other people have had more enthusiastic experiences with it. And also, Mosley is just a voice to keep an eye on. Let me know what you think about Elmet, and I'll see you soon for a video that's not related to the Women's Prize. Do you even remember what those feel like coming from this channel? And after that, I'll be getting back to more new long list reviews. So bye for now, and thanks for watching.